Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast, the Dari Hammer podcast, where we delve into the extraordinary journeys of remarkable people. Our guest today is someone who not only played a crucial part in shaping our present, but also continues to carve our path into the future. I have the pleasure today of hosting Mr. Lon Levin, an innovator in the realm of space and technology. Currently, Lon is steering the course of tech innovation as the president of Sky 7 Ventures. In his role, he shapes budding enterprises, leveraging his decades of experience and deep relationships throughout the global space enterprise. But the journey that led him to here is just as noteworthy. Co-founding XM Satellite Radio in the early 90s was a significant leap that redefined our audio experiences forever. His career is rich with diverse experiences from law to high-tech business and space exploration, contributes to his unique perspective today. Beyond his business endeavors, Lon commits his time to various nonprofit roles with organizations like the Planetary Society and the National Space Society, pushing boundaries into our understanding of space. Now, I'm really thrilled to delve into the inspirational journey of Lon. So sit back and grab a cup of coffee and join us as we take you to the journey through the life, career, and insights of Lon. There's a lot to uncover, so Lon, let's get started. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Daria. By the way, I'm a tea drinker, so I hope my tea is okay. But
Oh,
feel
fantastic.
free, coffee, tea, drink whatever you want.
There we go.
Enjoy the podcast.
Wonderful. Well, I drink both. I drink both coffee and tea. So I would say it's 50-50 with me. So I'm kind of an odd one. I can party with both groups. Let's just say I'm bipartisan. Being in DC. So Lon, so we're gonna really deep dive into your story because I think it's very inspirational at many levels, all the way from your past to your present. But just for the audience, just so they can connect with you, and without getting too technical. Now, you're the co-founder of XM Radio, and most of us know XM Radio from Sirius XM. And just for those of you who don't know, XM Radio or Sirius XM now is a satellite radio, and I was shocked when I talked to you when I noticed and realized that this you basically invented it in the early 90s. I mean, I was actually a college student in the early 90s, and I really thought XM radio was something from the 2000s, and that's what really surprised me. So take me into let's go quickly back into that time and just tell us to the audience, first of all, what satellite radio actually is, how it functions. So very briefly, without getting too geeky, and then take us just back in time and walk us through how one day you sat in your chair and you said, radio sucks, we need to do better, and let's just connect it to satellite, and just walk us through it. Just very quickly for the audience to connect.
Well, absolutely. And again, thank you so much for this chance just to talk with you. So very quickly, with regard to satellite radio is a technical service that provides. By the way, it's always been the same plan: overwhelming choice, great quality, and it's ubiquitous. It covers the entire continent of the United States. The only way to really do that is to have a satellite, which is essentially a very, very large antenna in the sky, covering the continent. In order to provide quality service, and particularly if it's audio, you need to make sure that the listener never loses signal. So how do we do that? Well, we have two satellites so that they're both looking at from two different angles to make sure that they strike your car that's on the road where you're not in a city. Because when you're in a city, there's a third transmission, and those are the terrestrial repeaters, because sometimes you're going to go behind a building, no more satellite, but you got to get the signal. Because as we found out with audio service, people do not tolerate loss of signal. You can tolerate it more if it's video, there's different stimulus coming at you, but audio, you either get a full signal, otherwise you won't listen. So the reality is that XM and now Sirius XM, they cover 99.3% of all the surface of the continent, essentially, or at least continental United States, most of I should say most of Canada, but a lot of Canada, and then a lot of Mexico.
Now, every innovation starts with an idea, right? So I know ideas, for those entrepreneurs on the audience, ideas pop up in our head all the time. But to me, when I observe people like you and all these innovators that really changed the way we live today, is that they had an idea that actually solved a problem. So they didn't try to retrofit a problem to an idea. They didn't try to create a problem so it matches their idea. And I see a lot of innovations fail because of that reason. But was that like a process that led you to that innovation, or literally you were like me in a shower one day and you're like, oh my God, I got it. I have an idea. Like, how did that evolve? Were you working on something else and then you kind of
Well, it wasn't. I'm sorry, it wasn't quite like a revelation in um, in the shower, but it was a revelation. And you had asked me that in the previous question, the same question, and that is, how did I get there? How did the idea come about? Well, you're right. Usually, ideas that succeed are dealing with current problems that we have, but people aren't seeing the solution just yet. Okay, so I was both a musician. I mean, three things, maybe four things, great confluence of events. I'm a musician, so I love music. I'm very eclectic in my musical tastes. Two, I loved radio as a child. Now, I'm a bit older than you are, and there was a time when FM radio was talking to a whole generation. It was cool, it was hip, it was bringing music to everybody, and it was relatively more eclectic. So that's two things. The third thing is that I was a satellite guy. I'm in the satellite business. I'm in the space business. I loved it. It was my career. I'm an entrepreneurial satellite company that's doing mobile satellite services, the precursor to like the Iridiums of the world today and Starlink. And so I was there. And then fourth, things were in the air. In other words, what was in the air, literally and figuratively, there was satellite television. In those days, it was only 5 channels before we had the two major ones in the United States and in Europe and all that. We have hundreds of channels. All right, so everything was there. And as you point out, this is 1992, 1991, 92. So radio sucks. Quality is not very good. What's going on here? Why? What's the problem here? And this was the epiphany. When I began to understand that and think about it, I've always been somewhat entrepreneurial and just like yourself. How do we solve problems? You see the problem, there's got to be a solution here. So in this case, I had all the skills and I had the knowledge. I was right place, right time. And I'm thinking to myself, why does radio suck as bad as it does? And the word suck is an understatement. 20 minutes of commercials. Every station had the same playlist, which was essentially adult-oriented rock. There were very few stations catering to individual tastes, whether it was Hispanic or R&B or classical or anything you can, it's hard to believe, it just wasn't available. Okay, so the reason is because there were all these different owners, period. And every owner was after the same audience because it was the biggest audience. It was the audience that was going to pay the money, 20 minutes worth of commercials. You better play a song that's going to grab your ears. So everyone's playing Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. It covers an awful lot of ground and everyone loves it. Yeah. There were other songs like that in those days. And Michael Jackson was another one, Beat It. I mean, you could just everyone would listen to it. You'd stop and listen to it, and you had no choice. And if you could spin the dial and you go to another Born to Run, you'd listen to it. It was so stupid. But that's why radio's so bad, because there were so many different owners.
Well, I really do remember those days. So everything you're telling me, I'm getting flashbacks.
Right. And like you're starting to sweat and feeling really miserable because you're in a car and it sucked. But so then, okay, so how do you fix that? Well, if you could own a whole market, if you owned every radio station in a market, what would you do? you would counter program, because now your goal is just to get as many ears, always getting many ears, but this time you want one set of ears for contemporary adult rock, one set of ears for R&B, and you would just figure out what would be the 30 best channels that people would be interested in. You probably have an NPR channel, maybe another news channel, sports. I mean, there are always ideas, and they're all on XM now, but in those days, it just didn't exist. Okay, so then how do you do that? Well, how do you build a business around it? What kind of infrastructure do you need? I'm a satellite guy. All you got to do now, I don't want to make it sound like all you got to do is have an idea and then it happens. But if you can get an antenna high enough, have enough capacity to have 50 channels, maybe build the radios and all that, and do maybe if you can do all this, you can have a business and you can aggregate enough customers throughout each of the markets that you could have a revenue stream and ultimately have some kind of cash flow payback and ultimately be profitable. That was the idea, and it all came from that radio sucked. And if you control a market, you would counter program and have all these channels. And out of that was born the idea of let's have satellite radio to get there, but that was the idea. And by the way, what's cool about the idea is that it was always the same fundamental idea. Of course, there were twists and turns all along, but at the end of the day, it's about overwhelming choice, great quality, and ubiquitous coverage, which everyone loved. And that's why people bought it. And by the way, I want to point out was very proud of this, was the fastest growing audio product in its first year of introduction ever. Don't get me wrong, there are more FM, AM radios, there are more iPods in those days, but and more CD players eventually. But for its time, from 0 to 60 in the first year, largest growing audio product ever, and
Wow.
still holds a record for that, because it was such a hunger for it. Everyone wanted it.
Yes. And so what was from the time of the idea to the time of the implementation, meaning it going actually live, how long did it take? Now, first of all, when did it go actually live on air for the first time?
2001. It was in prototype for 2001. Like, I had the first radio in March or April. I was listening to it, but it went into the market in early November, late October, early November of 2001.
2001. And then
started in 1992.
Wow. So it took almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years.
Weren't you worried during those 10 years that someone is going to come up with something else and then all those 10 years are going to go to waste? Like, were you thinking about that?
No, the only thing I was thinking about, very good question. My only feeling during that whole time that I remember was that I was sometimes feeling sad that someone else was going to do it. I knew it was going to happen. I knew it from the first time we really thought about it, and I worked with others to develop the business plans, and then worked on the technology, kept on sharing the idea. And you and I talked about how do you get to be an entrepreneur and all that. We can talk about that some more. But throughout that whole process, the 10 years, I knew it was going to happen. But I was feeling bad sometimes that it may not be me and my XM team. We didn't call it XM in those days, but that team may not have the chance to do it. There ended up being 3 other groups that were also vying to do this in the United States, and we just ended up being the one that not only got there first by 9 months earlier than Sirius.
Now, just to that point, can you share one major obstacle that you faced during the formation of XM Radio, and just for the entrepreneurs in the audience and sweet people, how did you manage to overcome it? Because we all know that whenever you have a grandiose idea, as an innovator and entrepreneur, you approach it with such conviction because you feel you're the only one that truly sees the future. And you just have to be able to inspire not just the team, but the investors, the people, I mean, so many things. There's almost this weight on your shoulder. Can you walk us through one of those major obstacles in those 9 years from 92 to 2001? And how did you manage to overcome it? And what was like was there a pivotal moment in, if you remember?
I do. I actually, my memories of all this are rather vivid. I don't know if I can tell you the exact date, but I certainly have the feelings. It was extraordinarily exciting time, and to have been part of it was a wonderful part of my career. So I'm going to hit upon. There were a number of things, like there was a technical challenge, for example, how do you get the antenna small enough, and those kind of things. There were satellite issues, but let me hit upon one that you already talked about, which
Right.
is convincing people, convincing the market, convincing investors, convincing others to join. I mean, the whole convincing that they see the vision that the original people had, including myself, who was leading it. And so, just imagine if someone comes to you, or someone came to you in those days and said, "I got a new idea for radio." At those days, even though people thought that radio was not very good, it was ubiquitous. I mean, in their minds. And everyone said, "We have enough radio here. Why?" And also, radio is sort of not the number one medium. It was always more, video and all that. And so people just thought there was enough radio. And we'll talk about that a little more in a second. I just want to, because then imagine going to New York City. And this is the place where I speak as a New Yorker, by the way, where you think you have everything. And what do I need more radio for? We have all the radio we could possibly want. Let me tell you a little anecdote that I learned as I was doing this in New York, trying to raise money and convince investors. Because when I tell you the rest of the story with investors, they're like going, "This is never going to happen." Because in New York City, because everyone thinks that they have everything, New York was one of the slowest adopters of mobile phones in Northern Hemisphere. And by
What was the reason for that?
Well, it was the same reason why there's another city that was the greatest adopter of it, was the fastest adopter of it. We'll tell you that city in a second. You'll maybe figure it out as I'm speaking.
Let me guess before you say it. I'm just
North America. Okay. All right. So you think about it as I'm speaking. So in New York, and I grew up in New York, I grew up in the city. You used to be able to go into the deli and then get the phone. And then, and you were always able to get a phone really quickly because it was such a dense area that your notion that you needed a phone immediately just wasn't there. And so it was so hard for that market to adopt mobile phones, as opposed to other places, which you can imagine did need more phones. So it was that same exact attitude. And once I found out about that, I realized, you got to sort of educate people that there's a whole country out there that may need more radio, even though you think you have enough here. Because the reality is, they did have an Hispanic channel in New York. They did have a classical music channel. So when you use those as examples, but it was so shocking to find out in those days there were only 10 classical channels in the United States. And Hispanic may have been even less, because there was such a large population. And then serving the African American community and all that. I mean, it was amazing how we just weren't doing that. But in New York, you thought you were, and so now, and I hope you're thinking about what North American City.
I am.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you a chance, then I'm going to see if you got it.
Just a wild guess. I would say San Francisco, the Bay Area.
Okay, I'll give you another clue. It's not a U.S. city. North America, though.
Oh.
Okay.
Then I would say Toronto.
No, okay, Mexico City. The reason why is because Mexico City had such bad terrestrial infrastructure that they just jumped it. And they all had mobile phones because that was their answer. And talk about solving a problem. I wish I had that franchise that it just jumped everything. Similar way, actually, XM jumped everything, but $1 billion more dollars. And there's I forget the name of the billionaire, but he just became a billionaire almost overnight. who invested in it. And it's just an amazing story. And that's an example of there was such a for phones. And well, Mexico did. Okay, so getting back to New York. So imagine you're talking to these investors. Already they think they have everything they possibly need in their life. And then you say, well, here's the story. We're going to have to build a satellite system. How much is it going to cost? Oh, over $1 billion. $1990. Okay. Then you say, oh, and also, by the way, we have to do all this programming, and we have to do all this marketing and all kind of stuff. And we're getting all the Best Buys. We have to get in the cars. Oh, and by the way, people are going to have to take the existing radio in their car and take it out. You're going, who's going to do this? We have enough radio. And then you say to them, oh, by the way, they're going to pay for it. Which like their heads would explode. But that was the story. And that was the only way to make the dollars. I mean, we had ideas of having an advertising model, but that was the story. So every time it's going to cost this amount of money, you got to build this whole infrastructure out nationwide. You got to launch 2 satellites, risky enough. And then you tell them about yanking the radios off. And then when you like ice the cake with, ask you're going to pay for it, they were like, they pretty much throw you out of the office. But we kept on doing it. We kept on doing it. And then one of the things we talked about is, well, how did I sort of know we actually got somewhere? It's when General Motors decided to invest, and they were willing, even though not in the beginning, we were in GM cars for 3 years. It's really when they it could be small enough to be in a car. It could take us 3 years. We want to see how much money in this. And once that happened, it was like that was the defining moment. Now, others had invested in us, but it wasn't a lot of money. It was when General Motors came in. That's when we went public. That's when a lot more money was pouring in. And then people were willing to invest. The other good thing, and this is just about being right place at the right time, it was during the internet boom. And during the internet boom, everyone was investing in everything, and people were looking for investments. People were making a lot of money, needed to move their money. And we just benefited from that general enthusiasm.
And so, what do you think out of all companies, GM invested in it? What to them was, did they ever say it? What to them was different? How did they see that in XM radio, what others didn't, in your opinion? Or maybe they even verbalized it?
Well, actually, they did, one. And two, Ford, once GM did their deal, Ford was now looking at Sirius. And so they had a match. Look, these were the days when cars were not the amazing computer gadgets that they are today.
Yeah.
Yet they were on the verge of that. They're getting closer. They didn't have any screens or anything. But they knew that in order to distinguish themselves, and also there was all these other foreign competitors coming on real strong, Toyota and Honda and all that. And so they needed to differentiate themselves. They needed to have a cool thing in the car. And they were convinced of the vision. And once they were convinced of the vision, and by the way, they would tell us and that their vision was right, and that people were buying GM cars just to get XM radio when it was an exclusive product that you could only get on GM.
Makes total sense.
Makes total sense. And they had their own personal vision, personal or corporate vision. And good for them for having that and realizing that would differentiate. They had something called OnStar, so they sort of new satellites.
Yes,
where you could press the button, and if you were in trouble, it would rescue you, and if someone talked to you. And so they were already playing with that kind of idea, and mobile technology it wasn't quite there yet, but still they understood it. And so by the time this is like 1996, 7, they were looking for the next best thing that they could put in their cars to differentiate themselves, and it worked. For a while, they were the only one, and eventually others joined, but they were the only one for a while.
I think with every amazing technology that evolves, I think it needs the right timing to introduce it to the public, and then also the right time. Like in case of GM, they wanted to have a new car with buzz that brings in some buzz, and here comes XM radio, satellite radio, something that no one has, and then being worried about the competition, like Ford bringing on one. And I think, a lot of these, I remember when Apple Car came out, I literally decided to buy my car because it was one of the first one that had Apple Car integrated. Because I love technology. I think the utility aspect of technology, it saves us so much time. It's safe. It makes everything safer. And I think for a user, sometimes new technology, if it's too new, it's hard to wrap their head around it, and they might think that I really don't need. What do I need that for? I already have radio, because they don't understand the advantages and the benefit new technology brings to them. What would you say, as someone that is consulting businesses and entrepreneurs? They come with these grandiose ideas, um, and they're basically, let's just say, they're so enthusiastic about their idea that they don't necessarily realize that they may or may not be any use for it, but they fall in love, let's say, with their invention. And you, as an outsider, you look at it and you have to kind of break it to them. How do you do that? And at which point do you say, maybe I'm wrong, maybe they're right? Like, where do you draw that line? I mean, because we all are biased based on our opinions and based on our experiences. And there's always stuff that we don't know that we don't know. How do you draw the line when you consult these entrepreneurs, innovators, and these new companies? Which is
So,
what you do today, right?
well, it's part what I do. I also invest, but I also do help companies manage their new technologies. To some extent, I'm a consultant, but sometimes I'm actually part of management, and they pay Sky Seven Ventures, with my company, as well as sometimes I invest. Okay, so anyway, and also, by the way, it went dormant for a while. I think you saw my resume. I worked for Lockheed as an in-house entrepreneur, where I faced these same exact questions.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
What technology made sense? What technology didn't make sense? And now I'm doing it on the outside, and it was the same. So first, let me tell you how I start. People will ask me. Sometimes it's someone else trying to decide whether to invest, or you're not necessarily in line. But I'll tell you. So if you came to me and you said to me, Lon, I hear about this idea. What do you think? The first thing I'm going to say is, I am the last person to ever pour cold water and say this idea is not going to work, because A, I may not know enough, and B, I've certainly had that in my life way too much. I've had plenty of ideas that people questioned, and they question out of ignorance or out of lack of patience, or they just, they didn't have time of day. And so I'm the last one who's going to ever do that. I just won't do it. I'll never get to the point of saying this isn't going to work. Now, I do get to the point of I may not work with you. I may not invest in you, but I'll always let down everybody easy. So, and also I'll give them thoughts about what I think they need to do. But to answer, I'm not evading your question. I'm going to tell you very specifically what I do if it's an idea that just doesn't make sense. However, for the ideas that I just don't know yet and I need to test them, let me tell you the things that I look for. First, I just want to hear their story. I want to see if it hangs together. Two, I'm always looking for third-party validators. Who else agrees and sees your vision that is separate from you? In our case, we just talked about General Motors. That was really the validator. We had plenty along the way, but this was the big. Everyone else had a vested interest. They didn't care if we lived or died. They wanted us to live. There's a benefit of that. Who is like that? Often there are these technologies that the government may be interested in. All right, the government's interest is good, but the government is putting a lot of bets there. I want to know who else sees this as a good bet. Then I'm interested in who else is invested in them. And then I want to see their business plan. And it really comes down to tell everybody the three things that any investor, including me, cares about. It's the technology, I had it validated, does it really work, does it plan all that. And then it's the business plan, does it hang together? When do you cash flow break even and all that? And then it's the management team, either experience or they get it. Enthusiasm, I see a lot of that. What I want to hear is, are they good at their story? Can they tell their story really well? Because in fact, that's one of the skills you must have if you're going to be an entrepreneur, because you got to raise money and you got to keep on telling the story over and over and over. It's almost like a play or a stand-up comedy act. You're doing it over and over and over again until you perfect it. Perfect it, but you get really close. And so it's those three things that I'm always looking for. And if any one of them doesn't exist, and by the way, you can always compensate for the business plan and the management. You can always change those, and if the technology is not going to work, it doesn't make sense, it doesn't hang together or whatever, like no. And that's hard for anybody because unless you're a super expert in that particular field, how do you really know? All right, so I think I've answered the question. I hope I have.
Yes. So you answered part of it. The other thing that I'm curious about is that how do you that if you're also on the management team on some business ventures, you invest with them. How do you decide what to invest in? Do you go by just diversification, or do you invest in businesses that you obviously you believe in, but how much do you know of those businesses? Do you only invest in businesses and technologies that you understand, or do you go beyond that? And if so, how do you make that decision? Is it just you just look at the sheets, you look at the books, you look at the market, you look at validation, like you said, or is there something else? Do you also have look into the future vision of whoever that business or entrepreneur is?
I do have to feel the vision like instinctually. But to answer your question, first of all, what Sky Seven Ventures is, which is a relatively small fund, it's not really about diversification. My personal wealth is diversified. So this is more my business, and how do I so right now it's my business. It's been around a long time, as I told you. Went dormant a little, although it maintains investments, and then it's back again. Okay, but the point is answer your question. So what do you look at? So I think it's the same question as I already said. I said I want to see third-party validation. I really want to know. The second thing I look at as an investor and or someone who's going to work for them and devote some considerable time is, when does this go cash flow break even? And the reason why that's really fundamental to me is because I want to know when you're going to stop needing money, and then it's the money that you're making that will keep you going. We'll raise more money once we get there, once you're effectively in the black and things like that. So I'm always looking for that time.
Understand.
And then what I'll do is I'll go back in history and see how long have you been making money? I mean, where are we now? I always want to understand that. With regard to the management, I do want to see their backgrounds. I do want to get a sense of them. But I'm okay if they're younger and I'm around. I'm okay. I'm always looking to make sure that they have a really good financial person. Again, age doesn't really bother me. I want to point out, I was very young, and people gave me enormous opportunity when I was young. I was young when we first did XM Radio, and even then, I was part of other entrepreneurial ventures, and I've always lived that way too. I mean, no matter what, now as I'm much older, age just isn't the issue. The issue is people's abilities, their enthusiasm, and then their emotional, a sense of their emotional stability. I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean, it does take a kind of person to put up with the risks that the entrepreneurial life brings.
Yeah. So based on, obviously you have a lot of experience, like goes back, 4 decades. What do you believe is the most significant, attribute to a CEO or leader that a leader should have to effectively guide their team along that journey and meet the company's financial goals at the same time? knowing that there's going to be ups and downs. Like in your case, it took 9 years. And, when you look at companies now that you're consulting or part of, how do you navigate that? As a CEO, what attributes should you have? Because to me, a CEO is mainly a leader, is like I don't know, like a coach. Doesn't necessarily operate at all aspects, but oversees things and make sure the company's performance is and advance is within the vision of the company or the product. How, can you guys give us a little insight? What, in your opinion, is the most important attribute?
So this is something that I teach. I do teach entrepreneurship, actually worldwide. I mean, I've been in different stages throughout the world, and I love it. It's my favorite thing. And maybe even the older I get, the more I love to mentor and talk to younger people who are entrepreneurs. And a lot of people are. And I have dozens of people who have me on speed dial, and they call me. One just called me today and had her challenges. And all right. So anyway, I tell you this because this is what I start with every one of my talks, and I say, if you remember anything from this talk, just remember this, and then everything else is gravy. Hope you learn something. So, and I was taught this actually by my uncle, who was his own kind of entrepreneur in New York City. He was an attorney in New York, had a small boutique practice, but did well in Wall Street. All right, so I'd say there are 3 stages in every career. The first stage is analysis, the second stage is judgment, and the third stage is decisiveness. And the quicker you get to decisiveness and learn how to be a decision maker, the faster your career will grow. Not just to be a CEO, but to be anything. When you graduate from school, when you are taught skills in school, or if you're hired for a new job or whatever, you better be good at analyzing. That's why the people are hiring you. Okay, you can analyze a problem, whatever that field of endeavor you're entering into is. Very soon thereafter, months, weeks maybe, your boss is going to say, hey, what do you think? And that's when judgment comes in. And you can say, well, boss, I think we should do this. You're not on the line. You're showing your new analytical skills. And then you're showing that you can synthesize and you can judge everything. And then here's my judgment. Hopefully you're articulate, all that. A lot of people, for a lot of reasons, some of them good, your family, you like your job, whatever, stay in the judgment world. Every once in a while, they may be making a decision, but what they're not learning yet is what is essentially, to me, the definition of a CEO, which is someone who makes decisions with imperfect information. Because it's the people who can do that and do it well and do it relatively fast. And by the way, can course correct if it was the wrong decision and own the decision. Those are the people who rise the fastest, who stay in leadership roles. And by the way, sometimes they get nailed, they made the wrong decisions, and then, but they take it. I mean, they own it. And so that's my point. My point is, the reason why as an entrepreneur you have to be decisive, because the reality is you don't have all the resources that you need, but you have to move fast. And you can't just sit there and worry and say, if I do this or if I do that. You just got to move forward and see if it works. And then there's skills about learning how to do that, and incremental risk and all that. But to answer your
question, it's a great, I love that answer because I 100% agree. And one of the things to that, I don't know what percentage you feel is, I call it gut feeling, but gut feeling is based on a lot of subconscious decision making, based on a lot of information that your brain processes, right? So, in your opinion, how much of a CEO's decision is just gut feeling, and how much is pure analysis of data? When you make a decision, you have to make a decision based on a set of information. What percentage of that is gut feeling, and what percentage of that is true data?
Right. I don't know if I give a precise answer, but your question is a very good one. And that is, it's essentially the question is, do you include both in it? And the answer is I
Well, you have to. You don't have complete information.
right, you have to. So what you have to do is at least I'll tell you how I do it. I mean, I will always get all the information that I think is achievable, and if I don't have all, I'll ask another person and say, guys, do we have it? But on the other hand, I know the clock is ticking, and so I'll always give myself somewhat of a deadline. I can always violate my deadline, but I always want, and I'll tell everybody that look, I we need to make this decision today because we just have to move forward. And you can always say, look, this information is coming in, let's do it. Okay. So, I guess it changes, answer your question, it changes, it's variable to how much data that you have, but it's always going to be data driven. All right. But the problem or the challenge always is that data driven, it would be so nice if the world had all the data that you need and then all you have to do is make, but then it's not making, at some level, if we could all do that, maybe there wouldn't be any more businesses and risks and all the things that are taking place anyway. But let's put that aside to answer the very specific question, get as much data as I possibly can with the time that I have, and then just make a decision. And then that's the gut part. It's like based on everything that I know, and you do call it gut, it's also, you have relatively good judgment, you're a smart person, you are a listener, you see the vision, you think clearly, you're not impaired, and all these other factors. And that's how I look at it. Get as much data as you possibly can, and in fact, sometimes when it comes to decision making, I know what decision I want, like my gut level from the first day I embark on making a decision, and then I'm always flexible in those times of data gathering to keep on going back, and I'm always listening to myself. Well, no, actually, you thought that. That's why you're doing it. And then also I talk to people too. I try not to be alone. But at the end of the day, it's very lonely. I mean, you've got to make a decision, and it's your decision. You're the boss.
Now, within the same context, can you think of one of the biggest mistakes you ever made? Making one of these decisions, and then ended up being a big mistake. Can you think of one? And what do you think you learned from that? And are you applying that? And how do you applying that experience currently or thereafter?
I want to be careful about big mistakes. The ones that came to mind, I was just thinking about one today, and it was a personal
or failure, like a big
personnel.
failure.
It was a personnel one, and I don't want to go there. Okay, so yes, I can actually. There was one. It was more of a corporate one. Okay, I'd rather. I wasn't the decision maker, but I was a senior executive. And so someone once said to me, which I think is another aphorism that rings true with me, and that is that the cardinal sin in business is to be right and not prevail. Okay? And so that's where I imagine I've made some mistakes where I wish as a senior executive, of which I have been since the early 90s. I was a partner in a law firm before, but I was a senior executive in the 1990s. There's an example of being a young person, being given an awful lot of responsibility. I remember believing that, so we were doing a satellite business for the American Mobile Satellite. The vision originally was radio, two-way talking, but data was coming up. And we thought that was the future. Some of us did. But the trouble was the business plan was wedded to the talk, because talk in those days, there was more information and it required more capacity. And if all you were doing is selling capacity, you could sell a lot more if you could actually get the voice customers. But then there was those of us who said, no, the data business is going to boom. We'll get there. But the trouble is we sold Wall Street on the voice stuff. I understood all the challenges, but I was the voice of, we have to do data. We have to do data. And I wish we would have prevailed. Going back to the cardinal sin, and the smaller group of us, and we all could challenge the CEO, but sooner or later you can't challenge the CEO, and he already made his decision, and for that matter, so he thought the board made a decision, and for that matter, the investors made a decision, and so we had to keep on going, even though we knew who were deep in this business and saw the numbers, that it was the data business that was going to drive this. And the reality is, I believe the company still would be strong if we would have done that. And lo and behold, the future is more data driven anyway in the satellite business. So
Yeah,
I hope that's a story that is.
That was a great answer and great advice. People are, especially entrepreneurs, sometimes we are too scared of making a decision because we're scared of making a mistake and not realizing mistakes are part of the story. I mean, no one succeeds without making mistakes, and it's not about making mistakes or not making mistakes. It's about what we learn from them and how we can apply that knowledge into the future, because no one started walking when they fell from day one. We all started crawling at some point. And
we can just talk about that a bit more.
Yeah.
So what I always explain is that people think that entrepreneurs and others take enormous risks. It's not about taking enormous risks. It's about taking risk, learning how to manage risk. Those are the great entrepreneurs. And so what I tell people is that what your real skill has to be after you make your decision, you've made it, you're clearly taking a risk because it's based on imperfect information, is that managing your risk. And that is, are you managing the decision you made, the risk you took? And you got to get good at, keep on looking at it, manage it, and then, and so in the case of what I just gave you, they weren't managing their risk anymore. They were spending hundreds of millions of dollars on this voice thing when people knew that maybe that wasn't the right thing, but they couldn't correct. They were unable to correct. And it happens a lot in business where people raise money, they tell a story, they can't change the story. Understandable, right? Wait a minute, you're changing the story. I just invested in this. And no one wants to face that, but sometimes you better face that, otherwise. And I mean, that's like enormous black and white risk. Then there's the smaller day-to-day managing your decisions kind of risk.
Yeah, it's like knowing when to cut your losses and when to move on and when to stick with it.
Exactly. That's another way of saying it. That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's the analysis part, and then between the analysis, the judgment, the decisiveness, everything you already said, that's, I think, what makes a good CEO and leader or executive, to understand that, understanding that there are pressures from shareholders or investors, etc. And I think that's its challenge. That's what crushes a lot of businesses. And I feel the larger a business gets, the more difficult I feel it becomes to navigate those waters, because the pressure gets.
In fact, that is the challenge of large businesses. They're making a lot of money. They got a great model, but the future's coming, and well, they either manage through it or they don't. And you and I have lived long enough to know the various companies that we've seen come and go that were giants, and then they've gone away.
So let's switch the gears here a little bit into space. You being a satellite guy, like you say yourself, you've been involved with the Planetary Society, the National Space Society, and such. Could you share some of your thoughts on the current state of space exploration? I see a lot of these videos going on social media claiming we never landed on the moon, like we didn't even have the technology, like we don't even have the technology today to land. There's so many fake news in regards to space exploration going on now. First of all, can you clarify that for us, being the expert in space and such? And then also, how do you think the current state of space exploration is going to impact the next generation of entrepreneurs? whether it is in the space business or in other businesses, like, you took space to radio, for example.
So, well, first, with regard to people's disbelief of space, uh, it's it is.
Like, where does that come from?
I mean, we're trying to psychoanalyze human mass for this thing we're part of, our fellow human beings, and why do some believe in conspiracy theories and hoaxes and all that? I I don't know.
Because there's a large number based on the study. It's like 47 or 48% believe we never landed on the moon.
But look, you're a man of science yourself, okay? You know that there are those who are not,
yes.
okay? And the good news is the scientists seem to be winning still, and the people who use science to advance the world are doing okay still, as well as the people who landed on the moon. I think that people, it's funny, those are the same people. I mean, you'd ask them, do you believe in rockets? Do you believe, the same anti-ballistic missile that can go around the world, halfway around the world and blow up something? It's pretty much the same thing that can go straight up and land on this body that we see. So where it's coming from, I think it's more minds that are not as critical thinkers as we need. I'm sorry that more human beings are not critical thinkers. I think that's it's a loss in our society. And I think people need to fill their brains up with something. I think if it comes from anywhere, it comes from we're not developing as many critical thinkers as we should, and those people who have the same brains that we do, relatively speaking, they're using it to fill in gaps. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes the gaps are based on nothing but what they say. And by the way, isn't that a cool idea that it was a hoax?
Sure, of course.
Movies made it. Movies were made of this stuff. So anyway, but I assure you, I'm sure you and I could spend time proving that it's not a hoax, including there are things on the moon, by the way, that we left there that only could have got there.
Hopefully not trash.
Well, unfortunately, it is.
It is kind of.
But it's, it is trash. I mean, the flag is not a trash, but the vehicle, you're not going to use the vehicle again,
Yeah, I know, right? Like I remember I went to University of Mainz in Germany, and the Max Planck Institute there helped with the Mars mission. And by the way, a good friend of mine, rest in peace, Firuz Naderi, he just passed last month, as you might know, from complications after an accident he had. So, so I know you also worked on those missions, during your time, and how was your involvement with Lockheed Martin and the department? Did you also were part of the Department of Defense, or tell me your involvement?
I was separate from Lockheed Martin. I was on what was known as the Defense Business Board.
Yes.
The Defense Business Board, they have three. They have three major boards. I think they have a fourth one now, but in my day it was just three. They have a science board that tells the department about science, and by the way, reports directly to the Secretary of Defense. Then there was the policy board about policy, and then the newest one was business. And we just told Secretary of Defense through our group, it was a board of 20, best business practices that maybe they would consider applying. It was a wonderful experience because we saw the upper echelon of what's going on in the defense enterprise, we'll call it, and then it was always made up of people very nonpartisan. It was wonderfully nonpartisan. It just was, we want our Defense Department to be the best so that we can have the safest environment for our warfighters as well as be the most effective so we can keep the peace throughout the world. And so the board was and what I came to learn, I just in a nutshell, one of the military leaders described us as, what's great about you guys is that everybody asks the hard question, but you can give the hard answers because this really isn't your job. You're just doing this as volunteers and patriots. And by the way, we can ignore your advice. It doesn't listen to you. And so we would do these various reports on everything you can imagine, and all about best business practices. And it was eye-opening to see how difficult it is to run that organization. Like, when there's a horrible conflict, when there's a war, whatever, we get really efficient. But when there's not, it's a large organization has a challenge of efficiencies, and it just keeps on growing. And that being said, it's still amazing that it's so effective in what it fundamentally has to do, which is to protect it. So, but it was a great experience to have worked there. And Lockheed Martin, you asked about that. Well, I was more part of the civilian. I was somewhat part of the whole government side, but I was mostly part of the civilian side with Lockheed Martin. And in particular, I was asked to be entrepreneur in residence and run an entrepreneurial company that was commercial oriented. And meaning we were trying to just sell satellites and sell services to different other commercial companies worldwide. There was an aspect that had a government piece and a defense piece, but most of it was commercial, and it was a wonderful experience. It's an amazing company as far as just the amount of innovation that goes on there and how important they are as a defense company. But my focus was civilian space.
I see. So
commercial space.
Gotcha. But I know this topic always comes up. I know there is a part of terrestrial defense, but also extraterrestrial exploration. One of the topics actually I heard Elon Musk was asked that question, if he believes that there is ever been or will be extraterrestrial life or contact, and people talking about, oh, there's so much evidence, the government is hiding it. Of course, even if there was, I know you wouldn't be able to talk about it, but I think what he said is something, paraphrasing. He said, if there had been such a thing, we would have already known. And what else did he said? I think he said that either there is extraterrestrial life, and if there is, it's going to be all around, or there is none, and which would be kind of sad. If there was none, that means we're the only life in the universe, and which is kind of unbelievable. But if it were to be true, it would be kind of scary. Then we really have to take care of this universe, because then we're it. So what is your take on it?
Okay, so first, because of the work that I do, I hear everything, and I know all these personalities, including Elon. My closest colleagues are the scientists, in particular on the Planetary Society.
Mm-hmm.
Resumes and all that. These people are scientists and all that. And there are plenty of theories and all that. But what I have been essentially trained by my science friends, who are much better critical thinkers than myself, we just don't know. And you just have to be able to say, we don't know. A lot of what Alon just said is hypothetical. I understand the logic train that you stated. It makes sense. And by the way, I believe that people who think we're going to go to the moon have their own logic train. I'm not comparing that. I'm just saying that everyone has their logic to it.
Of course.
But you have to be willing to say, well, what evidence, again, you're a man of science, what evidence do we have that there is extraterrestrial? And I don't know if you're right, that if I really knew, I would be able to tell you anyway. I had a friend of mine who said, if I knew, I'd have to bore you to death. But the fact is that as best I can tell, we don't know. But here's the thing, and this is what's so exciting about what we're doing these days, is that we really are still just trying to answer two basic questions. And this is from the time we started thinking as human beings. Two questions. Are we alone, and where did we come from?
Mm-hmm.
And where we still don't know for sure. Clearly having a James Webb telescope and before that Hubble telescope, and then coming up with this Big Bang theory is so exciting to at least know, well, we can at least peer back to that moment in time. What happened before that, I don't really know. No one, there are just theories about that, or hypotheses, by the way, not even theories. But to answer the question, what I will always tell anybody, and this goes back to the CEO thing, by the way, that is, where's the data? We'll just show the data.
Well, what if there is data, but we don't know how to interpret it, or like what is the current state of our technology as far as satellite and radio picking up signals from the universe, and then even if we do, whether we recognize it or not, how do we even interpret it? Is
Sure.
there like a algorithm? Is there specific data or programs out there?
Well, there have been groups like SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and it still exists. I think they go back and forth in their funding and all that. But we do have dedicated scientists who are looking for patterns that would be indicative of intelligent life versus other patterns that we see that are more indicative of non-intelligent and
Just noise.
Noise. I mean, bangs or gravitational changes or whatever else we see, light changes, Big Bang. I'm sorry, stars exploding, stars imploding, all that stuff. So people do look for it again. It's something called SETI. It's a very scientifically oriented organization. No reports that I'm aware of, and I know people who work there, and I guess I would have heard something sooner or later. I am relatively well connected. I suppose if there was some alien invasion, I don't think I'd be the first one to be told about it. But I'd like
at some point you would get a phone call.
I'd like to think, but I have no idea who's on those lists, and even if they exist. But I really think that anyone who thinks about this stuff, what I just invite them to do is look at the data, talk with scientists, because I think what they'll enjoy is thinking about these things in a critical way and in a thinking way. And they're wonderful thoughts and they're wonderful thought experiments. I encourage them all. And in fact, what I find when it comes to people in the space business is there is that, let's call it romanticism. There is that thrill of maybe being part of either discovery or exploration, or having even human beings move off the planet somewhere else, which is all happening. I mean,
well, I think we get teased all the time in these sci-fi movies, right? With these sci-fi movies, I think it feeds our fantasy. I mean, but the big question I ask myself is, if we make any contact, are we going to be prepared, and how prepared are we really to handle the situation? Is there like, do we have a team that handles it? How prepared are we really, or are we just like shooting signals into the sky and seeing what sticks and what comes down. But then do we actually have a team? Is there a protocol in place?
But
We don't know.
we don't know. I could the trouble with if I had to form a team would be going back to the fundamental thing we're talking about. That we really don't know. We don't know which form we're talking about, and if something is even close. And again, we are still after these basic questions. Is there what are we alone? Is this the only place where there's life?
Mm-hmm.
And let alone life like human beings? And two, where do we even come from? And we're trying to figure that out. I mean, the cool thing about our existence and our abilities is that we are arguably the only creatures that can get off this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And even think about that stuff. There are plenty of other creatures on this planet, and I don't think they're thinking about where did we come from, and are we alone? Maybe I'm underestimating elephants.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, but elephants and dolphins can't build stuff that can go somewhere else. And I think that to some extent, it's in our nature to keep on doing this and to keep on going into these incredibly hostile environments. I mean, space is so hostile, but yet we can go there. And, we have this Artemis project now where we're going to have a lunar base. And once we can do the lunar base and be there for a while, we're going to be in Mars. Maybe not in my lifetime, hopefully in your lifetime, but we're going.
Hey, I'm not much. I don't know how old you think I am, but I don't think we're that far apart. But thank you.
You already gave me a clue about how old you were when we talked about listening to music and all that stuff. So
1973. That's your clue.
Well, I'm older. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that they're all not only good questions, they're questions that I encourage, but I also encourage people to be critical thinkers. Exploring it. And again, the protocols and all that, there's so many unanswered questions. How do we even do it? It's not like, I don't know how we would respond because we don't know who's going to show up and show us what they are.
Well, I know we're nearing the end of our discussion here, but as someone who's spent decades in air in space and satellite, any particular sci-fi movies or books that inspired you throughout your path and helped you, fantasize? And then, I'm a big Star Wars fan, having grown up in the 70s and 80s. Is there any particular movie that you think is most realistic that could actually happen in the future and that inspired you, or a book?
Like realism. First, let me tell you, it's a great book about entrepreneurship is Moneyball by Michael Lewis.
Michael Lewis.
Moneyball. They made a movie out of it with Brad Pitt.
Oh yeah, I watched that.
Yeah. So, but the book is even better because what it talks about is coming up with a new idea and convincing an incredibly stodgy industry that change was coming. And by the way, you know what? I wish we could talk about it a little more. And I know we can.
Yeah, well, we can talk about it. Go ahead.
Was that
because that's my last question is what is there that you feel we should talk about that we didn't talk about?
Okay, well, all right. Well, let me first answer the question.
Yes.
The movie or book inspirations and all that. And I think that because I'm inspired by, I think I'm more inspired by entrepreneurship and creating ideas that people want to buy and all that. I mean, that's really what motivates me. So I'm in the space industry. I love it. There's room. I'm part of it. I don't want to tell you that I wouldn't be here otherwise. But the other point, I was also in the radio and music business when I was in XM Media too, or in the communications business. And space has so much new technology and all that it's exciting to be in. So I am a space guy. I'm considered a space guy, a space cadet, as we call ourselves. So, and I've had leadership roles throughout the industry. So I'm a space guy. But that being said, I'm really turned on by just creating new ideas and the like. So there's that part of it. But when it comes to space, I I think that um, I it's somewhat cliche, but I'm really constantly inspired by this grand vision that Star Trek presents, and that is we really can work together and get into space and do more and more things, including meet new civilizations and all that. I mean, that's not quite a protocol, but they have one protocol, was the prime directive, which you can't interfere with anybody. Because somehow, if we have that ability to get that far into space, we must have advanced technologies relative to other life. Because even if we find that there's life somewhere, it may be less evolved than ours and all. So we have the sense that there's got to be greater life in the world and the universe, and maybe I hate to think that we're so advanced. Who knows?
I mean, for now, have to consider ourselves more advanced because we don't know any, like you said, living subjects that could go outside of space, and we have been. I mean,
imagine that achievement that we.
Yeah, I think that's important. What you said, I like that because it gives us a true perspective as opposed to fictitious perspective that we're the dumbest in the universe. That there's some people have these theories that there's so many much more smarter lives out there that they're actually looking down to us and laughing at us for not even finding them and how stupid we are. I don't think that will help our endeavors. I think we have to give ourselves more credit.
I am a science fiction geek. I love science fiction. But you ask me like what inspires me. It's more like that whole vision of that that our society, which is what it's based on, as opposed to a galaxy long ago, far, far away. Which are great movies too. I love them as well. I mean, but I'm a geek. I love all those movies. I'm easy to entertain when it comes to. So what was your other question? Oh, was what have we talked about? So what do you want
to do? Anything that we haven't talked about that you feel we should talk about.
You sent me a bunch of questions. Can I tell the listeners you sent me some questions? So and then I looked them all and I wrote down the answers to all of them just to get ready. That's how I do it when I do these interviews. Let's see. You were asking about. Okay, so one of the things I didn't talk about, if I could just touch on it, and that is that, and this goes to Moneyball, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I was shocked when I was getting into the XM business. Here were the car companies that were trying to change themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They were relatively innovative. They had their models, still conservative. I have never seen such conservatism in any industry. And I've been part of other companies that have made a lot of money and they don't want to change in the recording music business.
Wow.
We were so frightened. And remember, this is the days of Napster and the days of the internet kind of coming.
Yeah.
And people just downloading music and stealing it and all that. They were frozen in their tracks. They had no idea what to do. I'm not quite sure they had ever figured out what to do because others do, like Apple and others. And it's because they were so enamored with their old model that they didn't know how to monetize what they had. And these are days when once you sold a record and it was 6 years old or whatever, you never sold another record again. You got to keep on. So they had no idea that they can use their catalogs and sell. Maybe the Beatles or Frank Sinatra or something great like that. But, besides that.
Sure.
And they were so worried about us. And they were so worried about XM radio. And they were lumping us together with the internet. But then when I'd meet with them and I'd talk to them like I'm talking with you now, we're having a good, high-level, critical thinking discussion about the world, any topics game, no matter hoaxes, space, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't talk to them. They were just They were impenetrable because they were so scared. You could just see it. They had no idea how to move. And
What in your mind now in hindsight was their greatest fear of? I mean, um, was it that they just didn't want to rock the boat? Their conservatism? Was it that they just didn't have the understanding of this technological revolution and see how they can capitalize on it and monetize it? Like, which one was it?
well, those are both great questions. And the answer is that um, when you're dealing with sometimes even the CEO who's just put there, but definitely the middle management people and all that, if they're all making money presently, they don't want to change things. And it's understandable. So,
That's
like,
like the death sentence of to any company, especially today.
especially today,
Oh,
but you don't see it in the beginning because
yeah,
people are making money. You can't fault them for hanging on as long as they can
yeah.
to make the last dollar before the world just gets shifted under their feet. And so,
But that's the antithesis of a CEO and a leader,
well,
based on our conversation. And these are smart people. How does that make sense?
that's the CEO and or a leader in an entrepreneurial venture. Okay, I think the CEO also in those more established companies has to be that way too. But that CEO has to answer to the people who are getting dividends
Yeah,
based on the model that they
yeah.
have proven for the last 25 years. And the CEO has to make sure that they're still getting money. For them to change, that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, that's, you can't be a slave to the shareholders. I mean, that's the thing,
But you have
that what we talked about, the bigger the business gets, the more difficult it becomes, and the slower they get with innovation. And that's why, look at what happened to Blockbuster. There's so many big companies that they thought they're untouchable, almost went out overnight with the new evolving technology. And I think the ones that can adapt the fastest and the quickest are the ones that are going to survive. And you have to be willing to evolve. You can't just be caught up in your own ways and and you know what? For the shareholders, I mean, they would want the same thing. I mean, if I'm a shareholder, so if I have my money invested in a business and a company, I want them to innovate. I don't want them to just stay with the status quo and then just be scared to make a move so they might rock the boat. I mean,
most shareholders would agree with you in theory, but everyone is trying to squeeze the last dollar out of the old way you made money.
until the
So,
bubble bursts
well, exactly,
and
but
then everybody jumps ship.
right. Well, that's what sometimes happens. But you know what? The good news is it also allows for entrepreneurs to take advantage of that. Now, there are companies that actually are good at shifting. Netflix being a very recent and great example. They were selling their CDs, not CDs, their DVDs. The mail order thing that they were beat Blockbuster at. Blockbuster kept on staying with their model. Netflix says, streaming's the future. And I mean, look what they did. They like totally destroyed their old business
Yeah.
and they went to their new business. If
And
you can do that, all the power to you.
And so, how do you think now the streaming radio, like Spotify, we talked about it a little bit earlier, several days ago, streaming businesses like Apple has now, iTunes has, Spotify, Pandora. I mean, that has taken a huge chunk out of radio, traditional radio market, as well as satellite radio. Even though satellite radio has some unique programs that are just irreplaceable, like they're like part of our culture now. It's hard to imagine our lives without it, like Howard Stern and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But how do you see podcasting? What we're doing, this stuff used to happen over the radio in a shorter format. That affected by music streaming and podcast.
So first of all, podcasting is an example of this evolution of talk radio. I mean,
Right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
and
Exactly.
what's great about podcasting is is, and this goes to music in general, it's it's how relatively easy and inexpensively qualified people can do it. I mean, I think I don't want to speak about me too much, but you are as good as anyone, who's an interviewer and who's talking. You're intelligent, you're worldly, you know what's going on, and you're asking
Thank
good
you.
questions. You're welcome. And so, but I think that there's a lot of that. And then the question that you have as a podcaster, as well as all this new music that's coming up, this is what we talked about the other day, is how do we sort through that?
Mm-hmm.
If someone really wants to learn about XM or really likes, I think if they like you, they're going to hook into, I like this guy and the way he interviews, and I like the way he edits his programs and his all usable stuff for me. But what about the person seeking XM radio or entrepreneurship or whatever? I mean, how do they find this particular podcast? Well, the same with music. There's so much more music out there. And I think that one of the challenges for all of these kind of audio and video, both I mean, entertainment and educational, whatever, is how do we curate? And I think that yes, there are these algorithms where Spotify picks up what you like and they think they're giving you more of that, and I think that's cool. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that they're being fed all this great music that's being created worldwide. In fact, they're not. And there's more and more music being created because it's so much more easier to
Yeah.
create. And also, it's so much easier to make movies. It's so much easier to make all this different entertainment, podcast being a type. And I, I think that those who can figure out how to curate, how to sort it, how to bring it to the public, I think that's the future. And then the one magical part of it is how do we create these mass opportunities? I get that things are going to be more and more personalized, and also they're going to be more and more of the world. Like there's all these world ideas as well as entertainment throughout the world. We're already seeing it, but I'm really curious. Where is the next um, Harry Potter or the next Beatles
Mm.
or the next thing that will be so attractive to the worldwide masses? And
You know,
how do we get it to them? And now that we are so um, disparate and fractionalized in our entertainment, how does that happen? I don't know, but I think we have as a species a need for being something that connects us, as well as we want our personal interests to be. Um,
yeah. I don't know if you watched the recent um, documentary about George Michael, which was a documentary that he was working on while when he died, and then so they finally published it. I think last month, and I'm a big music buff, and I love music just like you. I used to play music myself, and I still do a little bit, but uh, they asked him, and they talked to him. He actually, to your point now, he talked about it, and they asked him, who's going to be the next big star, and because he was kind of like the last really big star, like uh, you know Elvis, then the Beatles, then Michael Jackson, then Madonna, and then George Michael, and then he said, you know what, music is being getting so um, fragmented and that he said in his final words that he doesn't think there's ever going to be big stars like there had been, and I kind of agree because look how many years we hadn't had that, and because it's so fragmented. And then to the other point that we talked about, that there's so much music out right now. It's like, how could we possibly find all of that music, right? I mean, it's like, how do you find a particular fish in the ocean? I mean, we couldn't even find, it took us, I don't know how many days it took us to find a submarine that we knew where it was and we couldn't find it. That's how big the ocean is. And I look at music the same way. You want to find a particular music. It's so much out there now. It's almost impossible unless you know the exact title and the artist. So what do you think? Do you think AI, artificial intelligence, is going to have a role in that? Like for example, ChatGPT, we use it as a large language model that once it's more connected to the internet, I think now they're connecting it to the internet, can just help us find the music that we love and it's in tune with us, and then help us even get us in touch with artists that we never knew, but it's the type of music we like. How do you think AI is going to play a role into that future?
I can even give you the example. First of all, the answer is I think AI will be part of it. I think marketers and salespeople and also great musicians, obviously. But look, I mean, you can even imagine it today. What if, what if you and 25 people throughout the world ask their chat GPT or whoever, what is the most popular musical artist today? Or what's the most popular song that everyone's listening to today? That's a popular artist that's living. Okay. All right. That'd be kind of interesting to ask that question.
Sure.
And assuming it could actually figure it out and accurately. I mean, we have a lot of issues right now with AI, but assuming it could do that, then you could start imagining, all right, that's a mass artist. There are 7 million people throughout the world who love it. There are 20 million people. Wait a second. All of Africa loves that. You know what I'm saying? Like you could start piecing it together. And then once you do that, you'd start curating and you could create mass movements that way. I'm imagining it. I don't, until you did it, I don't know. I have to think it through.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think that is a way that AI could do it. But I still just want to go back to my fundamental challenge or point. I do think what we're talking about is one of the next great technical challenges in music and entertainment.
It is.
If there's value to have mass entertainment, one question is who are the masses we're talking about? What does mass mean, really? Let's assume we could define that. How do you get there? How do you create something that enough people really love that it's its own phenomenon? And we've had them. We know it exists, whether it's Beatles or Harry Potter. There can be worldwide phenomena, and we'll
I mean,
see.
there always will be to some degree, to one or the other. I mean, we're just speaking relative to the past, which is kind of an unfair comparison because the technology we have today is not the technology we had in the past. I mean, in the past, it was several record labels and they selected who the stars are, and based on the people's response or the fan base, and that was it. The technology today, you can't compare the technology today with the technology of the past. Back then, musicians were signed by record labels and they published things, and if they didn't, you wouldn't hear about anything, and if they did, they would make you a star, and that's why I don't think those types of stars will exist, because everybody can publish a song or music on YouTube or on Spotify.
But that doesn't explain the Beatles and their amazing dominance.
Well, that's different, right? So that is
true art.
Yes, that is true art that resonates and electrifies with the masses. I mean, that was hysteria.
Can we have another?
I'm sure I think we do. I think we will.
Okay, but then how does it in a fragmented media environment? That's my question. How do we do that in the future? I understand how we did in the past because there was.
I don't think it would be such thing as a cross continent like Elvis or the Beatles, where whether you were in India, you were in London, in Germany, or you were in the US. There's never going to be mass hysteria like that because how it's fragmented. That's what I believe. Because, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping. Go ahead, continue.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm looking back. I'm thinking, who was the last global music artist star, I mean, I would, if I look at a band, I would say maybe U2, um, Pink Floyd. Those were the last ones.
Well,
And
There was Michael Jackson, was
and as far as the individual stars, Michael Jackson,
Madonna.
George Michael, Madonna. Those were the last ones. I mean, who else
Sure.
was after them as far as globally?
Right. And the reason was because I would argue, as you're arguing too, because of the fragmented
Yeah,
nature of music and
yeah.
entertainment. But what I'm saying is that I think that there is a need, a human need, or a human desire to be part of something bigger and to enjoy a global thing.
Now, my question to you is that your nostalgia speaking, or is it just that as humans, we're just evolving?
The answer is I don't know. I'm truly hypothesizing right now,
Yeah.
and my hypothesis is that people like to have a mass
Mhm.
enjoyment and mass understanding. It's a way that we connect with each other,
I agree.
and just like we love to be at a concert and everyone's grouping at the concert, it's well, what about worldwide if we can enjoy something
Yeah.
together? And so I think that the music business, industry, invention, whatever that gets us there, I think
Mhm.
that is somewhat of the future. But you know, that's when you ask me what's the future of music. I think personally, I think that's the future of music that we don't have yet. But that's
Yeah. I hope
anyway.
it's true.
Yeah. Well. Um, anyway, I have other questions, answers to questions you asked, but it's up to you if you want to stop.
Well, this was, I could go on for hours, so we might actually do a second episode because, we had so many topics, we had from music to satellite tech to space. I was trying to just, focus on one area, but it's impossible because, everything you do has to do with all of the above. But one last question, and I would love to do a second episode to this podcast. But for this podcast, I always ask a last question in closing is that what is your advice based on all your knowledge occurred in the past decades, you would give an entrepreneur that is a true entrepreneur? Um, what advice would you give? Well, let me ask you the question different. What advice would you give yourself if you could go back in time, your own 20-year-old self who is an aspiring entrepreneur? What advice would you give yourself if you could sit in a time machine, go back and talk to your 20-year-old self?
I would say to myself that things that I just learned over time that nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems, that you really cannot predict the future. Don't worry so much and appreciate how much good fortune and luck plays in what's going to happen to you and be patient with that. And when you have your moments of success, cherish them. And uh, just, it's going to be okay. It's like, again, things are just never as good or bad as they seem. And go to, go to sleep. Go to sleep and then wake up tomorrow and then keep on going. It's going to be
That,
okay.
that
And
that's that's beautiful. It's that's the advice I give, and that really goes back to the meaning of the word perspective. And I think I just had this discussion with one of my young fellows, and I said, "Look, a lot of things that happens to us in life, we don't know how to interpret it at that time. We understand the meaning of it later, and I think we're not supposed to understand it at that moment because the fact that we don't understand it gives us this um, genuine, almost childish curiosity to explore, and that's the driving force that moves us forward as young entrepreneurs. And if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't explore with the curiosity, the energy, and some sort of naivete that we have, and we wouldn't evolve and grow. And I think knowing that, and I truly believe in what I just said, and is that I wouldn't want to talk to my own self from in 40 years with much more perspective, because I feel like, first of all, I might not believe what he said, but if I did, I think it would kill my curiosity and it would almost kill my drive. And I think it's just part of how life goes and how it's supposed to be, and that's the beauty of life. And I just came to that conclusion not too long ago, because I always ask this question to my podcast guests, thinking that wouldn't it be great if we just could go back and talk to our own selves, with the knowledge and perspective we have today. But now I don't think we're supposed to. We're supposed to know all this stuff, because that's the very thing that feeds our curiosity. We're supposed to make those mistakes, and our ambition and our drive will keep moving us forward. And that's the beauty of every entrepreneurial story,
Well, anyway, well said. And I agree.
All right. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with the one and only Lon Levin, the co-founder and inventor of XM radio and satellite radio as we know it today. And please stay tuned for another episode in the future with Lon Levin, as we have a lot of things to discuss, all the way from music to sci-fi and entrepreneurship. This was the Daria Hammer Podcast, and until next time.